Imagine being crowned the Emperor of Russia as a newborn, and then spending your entire life in prison. Now imagine that after 23 years of isolation, your captors offer you a slice of cake, laced with cyanide. It sounds like a twisted fairy tale, but it's the real-life mystery surrounding Ivan VI, the forgotten baby Tsar. Welcome to the Tsar, the Cake, and the Cyanide, the bizarre tale of Ivan VI. In this video essay, we'll unravel the tragic story of one of history's unluckiest royals, Russian Tsar Ivan VI, and delve into the eerie legend that he met his end via a poisoned cake. Was the young ex-Tsar really assassinated with cyanide-laced pastry? Or is this tale just icing on a dark historical mystery? Let's dive in. Ivan Antonovich was born August 23, 1740, to Grand Duchess Anna Leopoldovna and Duke Anthony Ulrich of Brunswick. Unbeknownst to the infant Ivan, he was born into the very heart of imperial intrigue. He was the great-nephew of Empress Anna of Russia, who was childless and ailing. Desperate to secure her dynasty, Empress Anna declared baby Ivan her heir when he was only 2 months old. Thus, in October 1740, Ivan VI became Emperor of all of Russia, before he even learned to crawl. A regent was appointed, first the ambitious court favorite Ernst Byron, then Ivan's own mother, since obviously little Ivan couldn't yet hold his head up, let alone hold a scepter. But Ivan's reign would be as brief as it was bizarre. On the night of November 25th, 1741, a dramatic palace coup unfolded in St. Petersburg. Elizabeth Petrovna, a daughter of Peter the Great who felt cheated out of power, stormed into the royal nursery with a detachment of loyal guards. According to accounts, Elizabeth found a 1-year-old Ivan sleeping in his cradle and initially ordered her men not to frighten the child. The soldiers waited patiently for the baby emperor to wake up. Only when little Ivan finally opened his eyes and began crying at the sight of the soldiers, obviously, did Elizabeth scoop him up. "Little one, you're guilty of nothing," she reportedly cooed to the confused toddler. But innocence was no armor against political necessity. Elizabeth's coup was bloodless towards the baby, but ruthless towards his birthright. By dawn, Elizabeth had declared herself the new empress, and infant Ivan VI had been dethroned after over just a single year on the throne. Now the question is, what do you do with a deposed baby Tsar? In this case, Elizabeth's solution was chilling. Ivan and his family were removed from the Winter Palace and shuttled off to remote captivity in the dead of night. The empress initially imprisoned the family at Shlisselburg Fortress in modern-day Latvia. Then, fearing any attempts to use Ivan as a pawn, she separated the child from his parents when he was only 4 years old. Ivan was sent to Kolmogory, a far northern fortress, to live in solitary confinement. Yes, a toddler was effectively condemned to solitary confinement. His parents, meanwhile, remained in a different prison. Tragically, his mother, Anna Leopoldovna, died in captivity in 1746, never seeing her son free again, or ever again for that matter. For the next 12 years, Ivan VI's world was a single cell. He grew up with virtually no normal human contact. His jailers were forbidden to even speak his name. In fact, his very identity was erased from official history. Empress Elizabeth issued a damnatio memoria, a condemnation of memory against Ivan. No one was allowed to mention him or acknowledge his reign in any official capacity. All coins bearing the infant's Tsar's name or image were to be confiscated and melted down. Even odes written in his honor were destroyed. It's a little weird that odes were being written for an infant Tsar, but hey. The once Emperor of Russia was referred to as only the Nameless One, or Prisoner Number 1. It was as if Ivan VI had never been Tsar at all. Inside his tiny little world, young Ivan had no playmates, no schooling, and no news of the outside. One can only imagine the psychological toll. Decades later, the few who interacted with him described Ivan as childlike and disturbed. A 19th century historian noted that by reason of the brutal treatment meted out to him, 20-year-old Ivan was half an idiot. End quote. The once baby emperor, now a young man, had never learned the simplest social skills or education, though intriguingly, he had been taught his ABCs well enough to read his Bible. He also somehow became aware of his royal identity. Despite the secrecy, Ivan knew of his imperial origin and always called himself Gossadar, or sovereign, in conversations with his guards. The image is heartbreaking, a lonely prisoner, barely literate, insisting he was the rightful Tsar to the few people allowed within earshot. Under Empress Elizabeth's strict regime, Ivan's existence in Kolmogory was essentially that of a hermit in chains. One anecdote illustrates how isolated he was. The commander of the fortress that held him didn't even know his prisoner's true identity. Ivan was a state secret on 2 legs, and to ensure the secret never got loose, Elizabeth had standing orders. If anyone ever tried to free Ivan, the guards were to execute them immediately. A sword hung over Ivan's head for years, metaphorically and potentially literally. Despite this, we might assume Ivan's life in the cell was at least physically safe as long as he caused no trouble, and indeed, Elizabeth, perhaps out of residual guilt or superstition, never directly sought Ivan's death during her lifetime. She just wanted him forgotten. Ivan lived through the entirety of Elizabeth's 20-year reign in his cell. In 1756, he was secretly transferred to the dreaded, forgive my pronunciation, Shlisselburg Fortress, a maximum security island prison near St. Petersburg, for even tighter custody. By age 21, Ivan had spent almost his entire life in captivity, from the age of 4 until 21. Now, fast forward to 1762, Empress Elizabeth dies and power passes briefly to her nephew Peter III, who, interestingly, was aware of Ivan's captivity. In a strange twist of fate, the new emperor, Peter III, took pity on Ivan VI. He relaxed Ivan's confinement slightly and even went to visit his long-lost cousin in prison for a couple of times. For the first time in over 2 decades, Ivan had a sympathetic, high-level visitor. One can only speculate about their meeting, the deposed Tsar and the soon-to-be deposed Tsar, as destiny would have it, meeting in a cell. Did Peter see a mirror of his own precarious future? We do know Peter III ordered that Ivan be treated more humanely, and perhaps in another lifetime, Peter might have even freed Ivan or used him as an ally. But history had other plans. Only 6 months later, Peter III himself was overthrown by his ambitious wife, the formidable Catherine II, better known as Catherine the Great. Catherine seized the throne in July 1762 in yet another palace coup. Suddenly, Ivan VI's existence posed a new and very serious problem. See, Catherine was a usurper, albeit a very successful one. She had no blood claim to the Romanov crown besides marriage. That meant Ivan VI, now a 22-year-old with a pure royal bloodline, was a potential figurehead for Catherine's enemies. In the high-stakes power games of 18th century Russia, an imprisoned ex-czar was a loaded gun waiting for someone to pull the trigger. Now, Catherine understood this all too well. The legend has it that Catherine actually visited Ivan VI in Shlisselburg to size up this threat in person. What she found was a psychologically broken young man, a bit out of his mind by her own observation. He might have been feeble, even docile, but as long as he lived, he was a rallying point for potential rebels. So Catherine made a fateful decision. She tightened Ivan's security even further, placing him in manacles or chains, and crucially, she reaffirmed the standing kill order. If any attempt at all was made to free Ivan, his guards were to execute him immediately. Catherine put it in writing and made sure Ivan's wardens understood their duty completely. In essence, she signed Ivan VI's death warrant, conditional on any rescue attempt. One cannot overstate Catherine's paranoia about Ivan. One historian writes that Ivan VI was one of the few people that the almighty empress feared. He was a threat simply by existing. Catherine even worried that she might not be seen as legitimate as long as this forgotten emperor breathed. In her mind, Ivan was a problem that needed solving. Thus, by 1764, we have a tense setup, a deposed czar hidden in a fortress, an empress on edge about potential plots, and guards under secret orders to kill their prisoner at the first sign of trouble. It was only a matter of time before fate triggered this loaded trap. The end of Ivan VI's tragic life came in the early hours of July 5th, 1764. Enter Vasily Mirovich, a 26-year-old lieutenant stationed at Shlisselburg. Mirovich had learned the true identity of prisoner number 1, and driven by either idealism or personal ambition, or a bit of both, he concocted a daring plan. He would free Ivan VI and proclaim him the rightful emperor of Russia, using Ivan as a figurehead for a coup against Catherine. It was a long shot, to put it mildly. Catherine was wildly popular among the guards, and Ivan was an unknown, possibly disturbed captive. But to Mirovich, the Brunswick prince in the cell represented a chance to restore legitimate monarchy and perhaps catapult Mirovich from a lowly lieutenant to the power behind the throne. Shortly after midnight, Mirovich put his plan into action. He rallied a handful of soldiers and went to Ivan's quarters, overwhelming the outer guards. We can imagine the scene. Torches in the darkness, the clanging of steel on steel as the mutineers clashed with loyalists in the corridors of the fortress. Mirovich's party forced their way to Ivan's cell, but they were seconds too late. The moment the alarm was raised, Ivan's two personal jailers, who had strict orders from Catherine, sprang into action. They entered Ivan's cell, and before the would-be liberators could reach him, they carried out Catherine's grim instruction. Ivan VI, the 23-year-old lost Tsar, was run through with bayonets and killed on the spot by his guards. Some say he was stabbed multiple times, others simply that he was murdered immediately once the rescue attempt began. Either way, by the time Mirovich burst into the cell, Ivan lay dead in a pool of blood. The loyal guards then coolly told the stunned lieutenant, "Here's your Tsar, take him," presenting Ivan's lifeless body as a grim prize. The coup was over almost as soon as it started. Mirovich, having failed to produce a living Tsar, surrendered. He famously declared that he had arrived too late. The prison commander wrote to Catherine that the job was done. The corpse of Ivan VI was hastily buried in an unmarked grave within the fortress walls. To this day, his exact burial place remains unknown. Catherine had dodged the bullet of Ivan's escape, albeit at the cost of spilling a little bit of royal blood. Publicly, Catherine's regime explained Ivan's death as the unfortunate outcome of an escape attempt, implying that Ivan was killed perhaps during a scuffle or while trying to flee. Privately, Catherine must have breathed a sigh of relief. She rewarded the two guards who executed Ivan with promotions and money for their diligence. As for poor Lieutenant Mirovich, he became an immediate scapegoat. He was tried for treason and beheaded in 1764 on Catherine's orders as a warning to anyone else harboring monarchist fantasies. Catherine, now secure, would go on to reign for 34 years, earning the moniker the Great. Ivan VI faded into obscurity as a tragic footnote, Russia's very own man in the iron mask, a man who spent his life behind bars and died without ever tasting freedom. Or did he die just like that? This is where our story takes a strange turn from the realm of undocumented history into the haze of legend. Cake and Cyanide. It sounds like the title of a murder mystery dinner party. Over the years, a peculiar legend has attached itself to Ivan VI's demise. According to this tale, Ivan was not killed by swords in a straightforward manner, but instead met his end through a more devious method, a cyanide-laced cake. Imagine the scene. The imprisoned ex-Tsar, lonely on the day of some small occasion, perhaps his birthday or name day, receives an unexpected treat from his otherwise cruel keepers. A sweet frosted cake is delivered to his cell. Starved for any joy, Ivan indulges, only to collapse in agony as poison does its work. It's a chilling, ironic image, one final gift of kindness turned lethal. But is there any truth to this story? Let's sift through fact and fiction. First off, historical records and reputable biographies of Ivan VI do not mention a poison cake at all. All credible accounts agree on the broad outline. Ivan was killed by his guards during Mirovich's attempted coup, likely by stabbing or quick execution in the cell. There's no report from 1764 of cyanide, or any poison for that matter, being involved. Indeed, cyanide as a poison was not commonly used or even well understood in the mid-18th century. Hydrogen cyanide was first isolated around that area, but it wasn't the go-to regicidal tool. Arsenic was far more typical for discreet poisoning in those days. So where does the cyanide cake idea come from? It turns out this motif is strongly reminiscent of another infamous Russian assassination, one that took place about 150 years later. In 1916, Grigory Rasputin, the mystic healer at the court of the last Tsar, was famously poisoned with cyanide-laced cakes and wine by his murderers in an attempt to kill him. Rasputin's killer served him pastries and Madeira wine loaded with potassium cyanide, a story which has become legend because Rasputin seemingly survived the poison, only to be killed by other means. The image of poisoned dessert entered popular culture through Rasputin's tale. It's possible that in a retelling of Ivan VI's story, some imaginative souls grafted the poison cake scenario onto Ivan's death, perhaps to heighten the drama or draw a poetic parallel. Another possibility is that the cake poison legend arose as a way to symbolize Catherine the Great's cunning. Catherine has often been suspected of quietly eliminating people who stood in her way. For instance, her deposed husband Peter III died under mysterious circumstances shortly after she overthrew him. Some say he was poisoned on Catherine's orders, though some official accounts claimed he died of colic. It's not hard to picture later storytellers imagining Catherine might have prepared to secretly poison Ivan to get rid of him, rather than rely on the chance of an escape attempt. A lethal dessert delivered to Ivan in his cell would be a very Catherine-esque plot, subtle, deniable, ensuring no martyrdom or messy public execution. However, there is zero evidence that Catherine attempted to poison Ivan VI with sweets, or with anything else for that matter. She didn't really need to. Her contingency plan, the Mirovich trap, worked effectively, if conveniently. It's worth noting that some historians even suspect Catherine orchestrated Mirovich's uprising as a pretext to have Ivan killed legitimately. In other words, Catherine may have set the dominoes in motion behind the scenes, making sure a naive officer like Mirovich would try something desperate, so that her kill order would be triggered and Ivan's death would appear to have been the result of his own supporters' folly. If that conspiracy theory were true, it remains unproven but not implausible. Catherine wouldn't have needed to bake a poison cake, she baked a rebellion instead. Still, the cake legend persists in some tellings of Ivan's story, likely because it is so symbolically potent. Think about it, Ivan VI's life was utterly devoid of ordinary pleasures. He probably never had a real birthday party, never had a cake or treats like a normal child. The notion that the one time he gets to enjoy a sweet indulgence that kills him is darkly poetic justice in a twisted folktale sense. It underscores the cruel irony of his fate. Even his rewards were punishments. From a narrative perspective, the cyanide cake symbolizes the idea that any hope of happiness for Ivan was poisoned from the start. There's also a grim parallel in that let them eat cake era of monarchs. We often associate cake with celebration or with the infamous, though it likely misattributed, quote of Marie Antoinette. In Ivan's legend, the cake is literally deadly, a neat metaphor for how the promises of power and mercy in his life were utterly hollow. It's as if history served Ivan VI a final course of betrayal. To be clear, serious historians do not give credit to the poison cake story. It falls squarely in the realm of myth or speculative fiction. It may have originated from confusion with Rasputin's case, from anti-Catherine gossip, or simply from people embellishing Ivan's already tragic tale to make it even more gothic. After all, Ivan VI's real end, stabbed to death in a dark fortress during a failed coup, is pretty dramatic on its own. But the cake and cyanide version adds a certain theatrical flair that proves irresistible in folklore. So in summary, did Ivan VI die from a cyanide-laced cake? Almost certainly not. The best evidence indicates he was killed by his guards with cold steel, not by poison. The cyanide cake is a legend, one that speaks to imagination rather than factual record. However, it's a legend that tells us something about how Ivan's story is perceived, as a dark fable of innocence destroyed by treachery. Ivan VI's life and death leave us with haunting images and a lot of what-ifs. He was a young man who literally did not choose his destiny. He was made emperor as a baby and was punished his entire life for that brief moment on the throne. His story invites us to ponder the brutal lengths to which people in power will go to eliminate threats, even an innocent threat like a child. Even after Ivan's death, the Russian royal family remained deeply frightened of his memory. Catherine the Great certainly never wanted a shrine or grave for Ivan that could become a rallying point. In fact, decades later, Ivan's younger siblings, born in captivity and spared his fate, were quietly released to exile in Denmark, under condition that they never stake a claim to Russia. The Romanovs basically tried to erase Ivan VI from history, an erasure so successful that his tale is not nearly as well known as the story of the imprisoned princess Tarakanova, or the late murder of the Romanov family in 1918. Ivan became a ghost, the Tsar who was forgotten. And yet, Ivan VI's saga has not completely vanished. Historians and history buffs continue to discuss and research his life, uncovering grim details that read like something out of Alexandre Dumas. In fact, Ivan is often nicknamed Russia's Iron Mask, likening him to the mysterious prisoner of French lore who was forced to wear an iron mask. While Ivan didn't wear a literal mask, the concept fits. His identity was hidden, his face unknown to the world, his very name a state secret. As for the legend of the poison cake, it remains a tantalizing anecdote. It may not be true, but it adds a certain layer of intrigue to an already tragic story. It forces us to imagine that lonely prisoner's last moments in a different way. Not with the clash of swords, but with the quiet, sinister bite of a dessert meant to kill. In a sense, whether by sword or by cyanide, Ivan VI was doomed either way. The real question might be, was his fate sealed by unfortunate circumstance or by deliberate design? Did Catherine orchestrate the events that led to his death, essentially baking Mirovich's plot, as some have suspected, or was it genuinely an unforeseen incident that she simply took advantage of? The truth may never fully be known. That certainty is perhaps why legends like the poison cake take root. They fill the void of what we cannot know with poetic conjecture. In the end, Ivan VI's story stands as one of the most bizarre episodes in Russian history. The infant emperor who grew up as a nameless captive and who died at 23 under murky circumstances. No monument marks his grave, no chronicles celebrated his reign. His life was a cautionary tale of politics, power, and his death, whether by blade or by poison, was a testament to how absolute the fear of a rightful ruler can be in the heart of a usurper. What do you think about the fate of Ivan VI? Does the theory of a cyanide-laced cake strike you as plausible symbolism or just historical rumor mill working overtime? And was Catherine the Great justified in her fear, or could Ivan have lived out his days harmlessly had she shown mercy? The story of Ivan VI leaves us with chilling lessons about absolute power and its victims. Let's continue the conversation in the comments. I'd love to hear your take on this dark chapter of history and the legends that surround it. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed unraveling this historical mystery, please like this video and subscribe for more intriguing tales from the past. Until next time, stay curious and remember, sometimes truth is really stranger than fiction, and sometimes a slice of cake is more than just dessert.